The current recovery is the weakest recovery of the post-World War II era. The report says the recession officially ended in June of '09, but payroll employment remains 6.9 million jobs below its December 2007 peak. The average unemployed worker has been without work for 9 months, the longest since the government began keeping track of it in 1948. The report explained that in past recessions, employment fully recovered within 2.
Forever Paws Animal Shelter at 300 Linwood Street in Fall River has an awesome dog up for adoption. Muggs is a handsome tan and white American bulldog with a very muscular and sturdy body. He's a big boy indeed with a typical bulldog personality. He's playful, a great walker on the leash, and would make a cool TV buddy. As he patiently waits at the shelter for his new forever home, he dreams of being the king of the castle who receives all the attention. He would be best suited in a home with older children and no other pets. Let Muggs become your new loyal companion and best friend. For more information on Muggs and other animals, call the shelter at 508-677-9154 or visit their website at www.foreverpaws.com.
1% below pre-recession levels 41 months after the start of the recession. According to the Heritage Report, economists estimate that the natural rate of unemployment
Welcome to Spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
AM 1420 WBSM presents Spooky South Coast with your hosts Tim Weisberg and Matt Costa.
Good evening and welcome to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the new man behind the board tonight. Science advisor Matt Moniz is taking over for the silent assassin Matt Costa, who has the night off tonight. And I don't know if that's ever happened before. I don't think there's ever been a night off for the silent assassin. I was thinking about it. There was one show when he was running a little bit late getting here, and we had to do things on our own. And then there was another night where we actually simulcast Beyond Reality Radio over WBSM with Jason and Grant from Ghost Hunters, and I sat behind the board and ran it for that show. But of course, I had Matt Costa sitting right across from me to make sure that nothing went wrong. Tonight we're working off a list of instructions that he left for us. So we've got numerous paperwork and the crash course that he gave us at the end of last week's show, and so far so good. I mean, I think we're on the air. At the very least, we're broadcasting on Spooky TV on SpookySouthCoast.com, so you can see the cameras that are going on in the studio there, and you can actually see the train wreck that will be the show tonight. And also, actually, you're doing something wrong. It's not us. But we've got a great night for you tonight. We have Chris Balzano joining us, our show's content director and a frequent contributor to the program. We're going to be talking about a wide variety of things tonight, starting in the first hour with the murder myth, which is something that Chris has been working on. And I don't really know that much about this project that he's been working on. He's referenced it a few times in the past, but I don't really know that much about it, and he and I talk quite frequently. So I'm excited to find out what it is that he's been putting together here, and we'll talk about that in the first hour. And coming up in the second hour, we'll talk about Harry Potter. So from murderers to Harry Potter, it's a natural progression, I guess. And I don't know anything about Harry Potter, so I'm bringing in a couple ringers who are going to actually step in for me and provide some Harry Potter info. Basically what I'll do is I'll look to them and be like, what's a muggle? I don't know what that means. And they can kind of like whisper in my ear or something. We'll figure it out as we go along. But it'll be a fun night. At the very least, stay tuned to see what happens when we try to actually run the control stuff here in the Spooky Studio. I'm excited. Are you excited, Moniz?
I got a bit of tension going on.
Well, of course, you're the one that's thrown into the hot seat. But, you have some experience, so I'm confident in your abilities.
It's not my first time behind a board.
All right. But it is your first time behind the WBSM computer. That's what I'm more worried about. I know you got the board part down.
Yeah, the board's easy. All this computer stuff that they've got going on.
Yeah, that's
a different story.
Yeah. And just remember that when the Silent Assassin was getting ready to run the controls for this show, he had like 3 months training on that computer. He was coming in on Monday nights doing the sports show. And then he went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting not long after the show started. So, he had all kinds of training, whereas you're just being thrown into it with some sheets of paper. So, hey, good luck to you.
Well, it's not that undifferent from some of the scientific instrumentation I use that use, similar types of commands to do things. So I'm not totally out of my element, but finding what I want in this menagerie of windows is going to be interesting.
Well, normally I have to do the heavy lifting of the show, as the host. But tonight I think more of the burden falls on you. That's for sure.
I'll do what I can, kid.
All right. Well, let's get right into it with our guest, Chris Balzano, who's going to be talking to us about the murder myth. And, Chris, I have to say, we stepped outside the normal paranormal discussion that we have here on the show a few weeks ago with Thomas Sheridan when we talked about the puzzling people, the psychopaths. And, see, there we go. You knew that was going to happen. Just, we'll talk it through on the air. Just switch that one down to B. Yeah, is that down to B? All right, There you go. And I think that the button might be off, but whatever. We'll play through it. Chris, so anyway, I was saying that we had Thomas Sheridan on talking about the puzzling people, the mind of the psychopath. And although it wasn't paranormal discussion, it generated a lot of discussion in the chat room. And it also, I received a number of emails, including one I received this week. I didn't get permission to read it on the air, so I won't actually do that. But just the gist of it was this woman told us that she had an issue with one of these psychopaths, and she didn't really understand what was happening to her, and listening to that show made her feel better. So the fact that we can actually provide a service for some people when we talk about these things makes it all the more important to step out there and do it. I want to know why you've been studying so much time, putting so much time studying murderers.
Well, it all kind of goes back. Hello, by the way.
Hello.
It all kind of
you don't get formal introductions, by the way, Chris, when you're part of the show anymore. I just throw it to you.
I know. I'm like, what the hell? Chris Balzano with me. Not even like an intro, but whatever. You
used to get a theme song. You used to have your own theme song, and we did away with that, I guess.
I know. I had 2 theme songs too. Anyway, but here's Chris Balzano. All right. So, for me, it all kind of goes back to a night I was sleeping over at my parents' house. It was before I was married, so it has to be at least 15 years ago. My parents live in Nashua, New Hampshire. And right before I went to bed, I was watching a documentary on the Zodiac. And the Zodiac is, I've always been fascinated with serial killers, with kind of crime, as much as the paranormal throughout my life. So I'm watching this documentary, and, we say goodnight, and I go into my parents' room, and, by that time I was pretty much a hardcore resident of Boston, where I fell asleep to the sound of sirens and the sound of people outside and biffing and banging, and they live in the middle of the woods, and so everything was completely still, everything was completely dark, and I'm sitting there, and I am completely 100% convinced the Zodiac is outside my window. Now, I know this makes no logical sense whatsoever, right? The Zodiac is someone who was active 30 years before that on the West Coast. Presumably he's dead. There's no possible explanation for why he should be outside my window. I wouldn't even fit his victimology. Outside my window, getting ready to come through the window, which is something he would never do, and kill me. And I'm sitting there completely frozen in terror. Not by demons, not by things under the couch, not by, demonic spirits, by a serial killer who I know in my logical brain will never, ever harm me. And it's been something that's been rolling in my head now. Anyone who knows me knows that I study myths, I study legend, I study folklore, and the paranormal is part of that for me. Well, there's this whole other kind of string of myths, and this string of these kind of psychological scars we have, and these things we're willing to accept, and these things that we willingly embrace that all have to do with murder and death. Excuse me. And it goes beyond just this kind of idea that, we're all obsessed, like if it bleeds, it leads. We want to see the violence. There's this thing that goes down to our very core, which allows us to accept things which we know are not logical, which we know will never probably impact us. And yet we allow these things to drive us. We allow these things to kind of control the way that we do things, control the way that we travel, the way that we kind of live our lives, the way we approach other people, kind of shutting ourselves off to some degree. And so I started to kind of, after my last paranormal book, I decided to kind of like, all right, let me take a step back from the ghosts and take a step back from those kinds of things and just start kind of thinking about what are these kind of murder myths that we're being fed. And then, of course, kind of going into the annals of folklore, the annals of especially urban mythology, and kind of fleshing some of these things out and seeing, not only what are they, like what are the most popular myths that drive us, that scare us, but also why do we feel that way about certain things.
Well, I mean, one thing that always came up when I was younger was the idea of kidnapping. I mean, you don't really hear that much about it these days, and as a parent, you think we'd be more attuned to it. But when we were kids, we had Adam Walsh and all these other stories from the 80s about kids that were being abducted and murdered. And that was something that I lived in constant fear of when I was younger. If I had just thought about it, I would have realized there's nothing about me that would ever make anybody want to kidnap me. But if they did, they'd murder me pretty quickly because they wouldn't be able to stand being around me. So, but I mean, that must be something that was always in the back of your mind too. That whole, growing up in that era of terror that you had to stay right with your parents when you were in the mall.
Right, and we were raised. You and I are approximately the same age. We were raised in the era also of the satanic cult craze. Mm-hmm. And so not only were you going to be abducted for one reason or another, you were going to be abducted because cults needed little kids to sacrifice. And there is no one who escaped their parents in an open place more than me. I mean, my mom used to freak out. To this day, she talks about how she's surprised I never was actually abducted by anybody, because as soon as we hit Joy and Marsh, boom, I was gone. And she didn't see me till she left. And I would sometimes intentionally do it to scare myself for some reason, but I always found my way back, and that's kind of how now I can always find things. Like I prided myself on that. And what the numbers actually play out is that, I had probably a better chance of being hit by lightning in Jordan Marsh than actually being abducted.
Well, see, when I went to stores, I couldn't stand shopping, so in my skinnier days, I used to hang inside the clothing racks, the circular clothing racks, and just sit on the bar in the middle. So for me to have been abducted, they would have had to have been able to find me.
Right, and that was part of it, that hiding from your parents and then kind of bursting out, because, kind of lean it back to kind of the work that I've been doing, the very first kind of images you're given as a child are these horrific abductions, or these horrific murders that start, before we can watch the news, before we know what a kidnapper is, we are fed these kind of, what the Germans call Kinderwundertals, which are these absolutely amazingly graphic fairy tales and life lessons that are passed on to us from an early age. And so, I just kind of threw a question out there to get some responses for people who are like, what are fairy tales you remember? Every single one I got was one of violence. No one really remembers. I think my wife said the Prince and the Pea, or which I think is a pretty nice one. But other than that, I mean, we are told from a very early age, if it's not the wolves that are going to eat you, then it's going to be the troll that lives under the bridge, or it's or it's going to be a cough. From a very early age, we're taught as we go to bed at night, listen to us, don't stray from the path, don't talk to strangers, because everyone in this world wants to kill you, including us, especially if we have a step-parent.
Well, I mean, that's the problem with being raised with these Grimm's fairy tales and non-Grimm's but Grimm fairy tales. There seemed to have been a recurring theme there of, the idea of you are going to be eaten, you are going to be butchered, but there seemed to be an underlying moral behind them. Are these stories that we're talking about, these kidnapping stories, these different things that we'll get into later on too, are they just our modern Grimm's fairy tales?
They completely are. I mean, they go back to the same themes. They're, no pun intended, wolves in sheep clothing. We haven't necessarily evolved from those stories. What we've done is, it's very easy to tell a child the story of Little Red Riding Hood. My son today, this week said, I want to go to the Jedi Academy. Like, that's where, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm going to the Jedi Academy. He fully believes that there's a Jedi Academy. In the same way that we really believed that pigs could talk. And that if you didn't work hard and build your house the right way, you were going to be attacked by something which could potentially eat you unless you kind of turned your life around. We honestly believed those things. And of course, as you go to kind of like our childhood and childhood of even our parents, being shown these things in terms of like the Looney Tunes and the Warner Brothers cartoons, these once again an extension of that horrific tale. Those don't scare us when we're 20, when we're 30, when we're 40, because we no longer think that wolves are out there trying to kill us. We now know that if you don't get your stepmother upset and you're not hotter than she is, she won't send a person out to kill you. We don't eat the candied house, and therefore the witch doesn't try to fatten us up and eat us. So instead, we have to be kind of jabbed in a different way. And so what we have are these kind of, and they're not really modern, they're just modern adaptations of those really scary, fairy tales we read as kids, and they're just kind of dressed up for a modern world and for, more importantly, an adult world.
So when we see the outbreak of mayhem that's happened, at least, I mean, I understand, the crime waves that happened in the early part of the 20th century, but really there just seems to be a lack of compassion for other human beings with some of the brutality that happened in the latter half of the 20th century and into this century. Is there a reason why things just seem so much more heinous than they might have been in the past?
We're giving things faster. The crime rate, if you look at it, actually dropped severely in the 90s. And if you look at the rate, so not the number of people, but rather the rate. If you look at the rate, it's actually, if you're talking in terms of murder, it's pretty constant. It hasn't had these huge spikes and it hasn't had these huge drops. It's gone up, but it's gone up the same way that, pretty much everything else sociologically has gone up. And so the reason why we believe these things are true is that because we're constantly being fed these images that they are, right? So, for example, I was just watching a documentary about cannibalistic serial killers, and the man who's actually Jack Levine, who is down there in Northeastern, made an excellent statement that most people don't recognize the difference between Jeffrey Dahmer and Hannibal Lecter. Like, they pretty much put them on the same level of not only the psychological things that would be to create that kind of monster, which are drastically different, but the fact one of them's real and one of them's fake.
Yeah.
People can't look at the movie of, let's say, The Zodiac, which was out a few years ago, and understand where the fact and the fiction is from that. So if you ask people, for example, well, how many people a year do you think die by a serial killer? Right? The number, how many people do you think die every year, died like in the past year from serial killers?
Well, the question is, how many do we know about?
Well, right, and I'll get into that kind of how these statistics are a little bit skewed because, we don't know necessarily bodies that are not found, like how many missing people are actually murdered people and things like that. But the number is less than 200. Right?
Okay.
It's about, if you take the statistics, about 174, which, if you say it like that, if you say 174 people were killed by serial killers, that sounds like a really, really high number. But the fact of the matter is that those murders account for 0.002% of all the people who were killed.
you can look at it this way. It's like 2 people per state capital per year.
Right. And which is really funny because if you look at a show, like let's say I've become obsessed a little bit with Criminal Minds lately. If you look at a show like that, the average killer on that kills at least 2 or 3 over the course of the episode, and they catch 1 a week, right? Unless you're watching it on Ion, which is on 5 times a day. But still, they're approximately catching 1 every 3 or 4 days, who account for 4 or 5 murders. Like, that is completely unrealistic, but seems really logical when you say it.
Well, also the television version of serial killers, they seem to get right to the point, because there's only 44 minutes. With commercials, there's 60, but there's only 44 minutes of TV time, so they kind of get right to the point. But in actuality, aren't serial killers a little bit more methodical in the hunt and in the actual kill?
Excellent. So there you have your murder myth, kind of the big number one, and that's that serial killers are wicked smart. And the fact of the matter is that most of them are not. You have kind of two different killers, and these don't mix, which is another weird thing when you have someone like Hannibal Lecter or these kind of these uber serial killers that you're presented in kind of books and TV shows. Serial killers are either organized or disorganized. And what will happen is serial killers, there are many more disorganized serial killers than organized serial killers. But we feel as if they're really smart, they're intellectual, they're well planned out, and the majority of them aren't. And so you actually don't have a lot of methodical planning with the majority of those serial killers. And so they're actually caught pretty frequently, or they're caught, fairly regularly in terms of in the number that they actually kill. And almost always it's by chance that they're caught. Even if you look at some of the kind of famous serial killers that we hold up, like the top 10 serial killers of all time, most of them are not caught by criminal profilers. They're not caught even by, really, really extensive FBI or even local law enforcement work. They're caught because they make a mistake that trails them back, and then all of a sudden kind of the quilt starts to unravel. And you really start to discover what you're looking for. Jeffrey Dahmer, they didn't stake his house out. He was caught for one thing, and all of a sudden they start to discover more and more things. John Wayne Gacy, the same thing. Son of Sam, speeding ticket. These are not people who were, and I think a great example would be probably my most feared serial killer, which is Ramirez, who was killed, who was found because he became so arrogant because he thought Satan was protecting him. So there's really not this. The majority of serial killers are not these masterminds who commit all these horrendous crimes, and after the 40th one, they're caught. Most of them are extremely lucky, and most of them are mobile. The ones that are the most successful are the ones that are mobile. So if you look at someone, you mentioned Walsh before. If you look at Lucas, if you look at Bundy, because they cross state lines, and of course we know this from the highway killings in Massachusetts. When you cross town lines, when you cross county lines, when you cross state lines, it becomes a lot harder to catch you. So the more mobile you are, it's not that you're really intelligent, it's that the bodies are dumped in different places and people can't get together to figure out what they've got.
Well, let me ask you this, and this might be another one of those myths that we're talking about. There's the belief, and we see it on television a lot with shows like Criminal Minds, that eventually these serial killers want to be caught, and they make that mistake on purpose because they can only keep this up for so long, and after a while they want to be discovered, they want to be caught. Is there any truth to that?
There are very few serial killers who were like that. There were serial killers who showed remorse. There have been very few instances of serial killers who turned themselves in. Most of them, that becomes part of, and you go back to the sociopath part of it, most of them, that becomes part of their need for power. It becomes part of their desire to taunt the police. More importantly, it becomes for those who kill serial killers who aren't sociopaths or psychopaths, and you can be a serial killer without being either of those things. It becomes actually your way of placing the guilt for what you've done onto someone else. So in other words, I gave up after 5. You weren't able to catch me. That's why I committed 10 more. And so many serial killers who kind of all of a sudden start to present themselves to police don't do so because they genuinely want to be caught. And, of course, there are exceptions to that rule, but the majority aren't.
Is there also, I mean, are serial killers aware of each other and they aware of what they're doing? Because one of my favorite movies of all time is The Frighteners. I don't know if you're familiar with that film.
Oh, one of my favorite movies. One of my favorite ghost movies of all time.
And in that film, of course, Johnny Bartlett, the serial killer in that movie, is consciously aware of how many victims other serial killers have had, and he's trying to one-up all of them. Is there a degree of that? Because we see a lot of that portrayed in the media of one serial killer trying to outdo another one.
Yeah, I think that's much more in the mind of the organized killer.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who part of the fantasy is notoriety. Part of the fantasy is belonging to that fraternity of serial killers, and therefore they keep statistics. You know, the majority of organized killers, I shouldn't say the majority, many organized serial killers that they've come into contact with, that they've caught or they've been able to kind of track and get information from them, they discover press clippings not only on their murders, but on the murders of other people. They find, bookshelves worth of books on serial killers and police techniques. And so they are very much, the organized serial killers would be very much aware of other serial killers, and even active serial killers.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have a hard time wrapping my head around how somebody can be that sick to do this, not only once, but to do it multiple times. So maybe this is another one of those myths that we hear, that there's some sort of release for the killer in committing these murders, that it's in some cases it's psychological, in some cases emotional, some cases it's sexual, but there's some kind of release that they have with each victim. Is there a lot of truth to that?
Think of it this way: that by definition, a serial killer has to have a cooling off period, right? So, for example, the kids at Columbine aren't serial killers; they're mass murderers. They amass a lot of bodies in a very short amount of time. There's no cooling off period. Well, that cooling off period can also be defined as a moment of satisfaction, a moment of release. So if you think of it like a pressure cooker, the pressure builds up, has to be released, is released, the serial killer is satisfied. Once again, keep in mind that's obviously intentionally a very sexually laced kind of analogy. Then it starts to build up again. And when it gets to its boiling point again, then the murder is committed. So there is a definite cooling off period by definition for a serial killer. So there is a release.
Well, obviously these murders are very traumatic and they're very emotionally charged for the killer and for the victim. And stepping into the paranormal realm for a minute, we don't seem to have a lot of reports of the modern day serial killer's victims, coming back from the other side and giving kind of information. Obviously, you have psychics who feel that they can make connections with some of these victims, but there's not a lot of investigation into current victims of serial killers of the modern era. Is that kind of like the Jeff Belanger, no fresh corpses rule, or is that just that we're not seeing them tied together?
I would say that when those kinds of situations happen, so say, for example, a group of really handsome and intelligent people go into this random BU dorm, right, where DeSalvo was supposedly in a room that wasn't the room that those people were in, committed his crimes. Now, at that moment, as an investigator or as someone who's looking into that situation, you're not trying to get in contact with the victim as much as you're trying to get in contact with the killer themselves.
But those handsome people might have also made contact with the victims, or so they might have believed.
Well, that's because they were incredibly intelligent and went about it the right way.
And not because there were television cameras in the room.
Right. I mean, I think that, it's sexier to get in contact, to try to get in contact with the killer themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, but also keep in mind, that would be assuming a level of intelligence post-death. So someone can say, hey, remember me? I was killed by Manson. Well, if the person didn't know who was that killed them, they wouldn't say they were killed by Charles Manson. They wouldn't say, I'm a victim of a serial killer.
Well, but I
They
mean,
would-
you mentioned
so-
Manson, but that is one of those few cases where we do have that. The Manson case, at least according to David Oman, the Manson victims are haunting that property and are aware of what happened to them.
My first thing would be, okay. My second thing, my second response would be, are they aware of the context? In other words, they might have awareness, especially in that case in particular. And I just threw that one out randomly, but we can talk about that one.
Mm-hmm.
Those victims were suffered, and so there were moments where the murders themselves, pre-murder, for most of them, pre-murder, there was interaction, and so therefore they would remember that interaction. But for them to then turn around and be like, and do you know how that fit into Helter Skelter? Is that happening in that situation?
No.
Or do they just know that they were killed by these people? And maybe even they have their names. But if they have their names, to me, unless the names were said, that seems like, once again, that now getting into paranormal folklore, that, that we get smarter or we get more knowledgeable about the events of our own death, post that death. Like if we can gain that information, which I don't necessarily believe.
So you don't believe in the idea of who did this to you and getting the confession, the clues from beyond the grave.
Not if it's a random person, and not if it's now someone says my mother killed me. Okay, my my stepdaughter came up with an axe and killed me. All right, there you go. Well, you knew that person, but to look at someone who is random in your life. And keep in mind, the majority of serial killers are random in these people's lives. It might be one or two chance meetings with these people, not necessarily chance meetings, but one or two meetings with these people, so they don't know them. And so therefore for them to then say that they know exactly the person who killed them, to me, doesn't make sense.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is definitely fascinating discussion, and I'd like to keep it going a little bit in the second hour before we get into our Harry Potter discussion. What we're going to do is we're really going to freak the crap out of everybody here, and then we're going to bring them back down with something a little bit more tame, and we'll do all that coming up in the next few minutes. But Chris, it must drive your family crazy to have you watching these shows and reading books about serial killers. I mean, are they starting to get a little bit worried about you? Are they starting to figure that maybe you're trying to figure out the way to do this without getting caught?
It's. I remember this kid, Scott Myers, who, we were talking about Satanism once, and we were kids. We were, like maybe 10 and 11, because he was a little older than me. And he said, "We need to stop talking about this. It makes me want to do things." And so I think there is that fear, especially because I'm submerged in these things sometimes, where my wife is like, I'm just going to, you sleep on the couch, I'm just going to lock the door and put the knives on my side of the door for tonight. So I think there's a little bit of that, but honestly, I think, which once again, we can call this myth too if you want, there's this illogical fear that talking about these things invites serial killers into your life. As if there's an active serial killer in my area or in, the Spooky South Coast listenership who's listening tonight who's like, well, I'm going to teach them what serial killers really are.
Yeah,
which, once again, assumes a level of sophistication and, a lack of knowledge of really what is victimology when it comes to serial killers, that now they're going to come and get me.
All right, well, we have about 2 minutes here, but we have a call, so let's go to the phones. Good evening. You are on Spooky South Coast with Chris Balzano. There you go. Should be on the air.
Caller?
Hello, do you have a question? Well, we did it right. We activated the phones right. I guess they just must not have hung on. All right, well, we'll take calls coming up in the second hour. The numbers are 1-877-996-1420, 508-996-0500. You can also email us, spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com. And you can also jump in the chat room on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com. And I do have chat room access tonight, so I can see what's going on in the chat room. I guess last week we couldn't see what was going on, so they had free reign to say whatever they wanted about us. But tonight, they have to be a little bit more.
They have
behaved.
free reign all the time.
That's true.
I kept them I kept them under control. Don't worry about it.
Kept on. I'm worried that you're the biggest instigator in there.
Sometimes.
All right, so we'll continue the discussion about serial killers and about the murder myths, because I want to know what some more of these myths are. I'm just shooting some out off the top of my head of what I think might be, and I'm sure Chris has compiled quite the list. So we'll talk about that at the beginning of the second hour, and then in the bottom of the second hour, we'll talk Harry Potter. I've got some guests here in the studio who are going to give us their review of the new movie, which I think is called Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Also winning the Guinness Book of World Records for longest movie title ever. And so we'll get their review of that. They saw it in 3D. And I'm guessing that the 3D experience went better than they thought it was going to. Yeah, so we'll talk about that and more. And Chris is going to give us some insight into Harry Potter. And also, we'll make the connection between Matt Moniz' serial killers and Harry Potter.
Hi, Tom Bodette, watching a little summer TV. You know, reality shows, reruns, documentaries about cats. But you'd probably be more fulfilled by hitting the road and taking a summer vacation, especially if you stay at Motel 6 with the lowest price of any national chain and cable TV in every room. So take charge of summer. Don't get stuck watching reality shows like me. Okay, those aren't real. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6 and Motel6.com, and we'll leave the light on for you.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM. First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM. First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
Very young people and very old people.
Tens of thousands are fleeing extreme dryness and lack of water in Somalia for refugee camps in Kenya, with many dying there, including women and children. ABC's Lama Hassan's at one camp in eastern Kenya.
They are walking as far as 50 miles to get to this place. The Dadaab refugee complex, with just the ragged clothes on their backs, in desperate need of food and water. The trek can take weeks through punishing, desolate terrain, except for the carcasses that litter the land.
The U.S. and Britain are pledging millions of dollars in aid. Casey Anthony is expected to be released sometime overnight from jail, says ABC's Jim Avila in Orlando, Florida.
Casey Anthony's lead attorney tells ABC News there are two places America's most infamous acquitted murder defendant is not heading: home to her estranged parents' house, or, contrary to rumor, to his native Puerto Rico. And while security is the main immediate concern because of public outrage at the not guilty verdict, there are no plans for Ms. Anthony to alter her appearance with plastic surgery.
You're listening to ABC News.
Are you paying too much for term life insurance? There's a tremendous price war among the major term life companies. Rates have dropped dramatically in the past few years. For example, a man age 45 non-tobacco user, $1 million of coverage, $75 per month level rate for the next 10 years. Or a man age 50 non-tobacco can obtain $500,000 of coverage for a monthly premium of only $110 per month, guaranteed not to change for the next 20 years. That's right, level rate guaranteed not to change for the next 20 years. If you're a smoker, we have great rates available for you as well. At Termbusters, we specialize in policies of $500,000 and above. If you're looking for new or replacement term life insurance, call today for a quote at 1-800-569-5440. That's 1-800-569-5440. You're probably paying more than you should. Call Termbusters, 1-800-569-5440, or visit our website at termbusters.net. Remember, 1-800-569-5440. Rates and availability may vary by state. Sample rate quotes based on preferred non-tobacco underwriting. Exam required to qualify.
Holding up Turkey as an Islamic success model for Arab nations, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who is in Istanbul.
As hundreds of Syrian opposition figures met in Turkey to discuss uniting in the face of escalating violence at home, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was discussing the situation with Turkish officials. At a news conference, the secretary offered praise but no tangible support.
We're encouraged by what we see of the Syrian people doing for themselves. This is not anything the United States or any other country is doing. It's what the Syrians are doing.
In Syria, tens of thousands of people reportedly attended funerals for those killed in the most recent protests. Linda Albin, ABC News, London.
Pleading not guilty, the man from New Jersey who's suspected of stealing nearly $500,000 worth of art and wine from galleries and hotels. Police say they found sculptures and paintings hung on the walls like a gallery inside Mark Lugo's apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. Douglas Horngrad is Lugo's attorney.
That speaks more to a burst of compulsive energy than someone who has the ability and the sophistication to go out and fence these paintings.
Lugo's charged in San Francisco with burglary and grand theft. Surveillance video from a nearby restaurant shows a man matching Lugo's description walking by with a framed Picasso drawing tucked under his arm. Apologizing for what it calls an embarrassing misprint of their number in the new Edmonton phone books, Alberta Health Services. It's a wrong number that directs callers to a phone sex line. This is ABC News.
Mortgages should be illegal because you're getting robbed every month. With a typical $200,000 30-year mortgage, you'll end up paying over $400,000 after interest. Hi, I'm John Commuta, creator of the Transforming Debt into Wealth system. My proven system can eliminate your mortgage and all your debts. Let me send you a powerful free CD. For your free CD, call 1-800-618-4001. 1-800-618-4001. 1-800-618-4001.
Chuck Severson, ABC News.
My name is Sue Smith. I'm 38 years old, and I work at a graphic design company. Which is funny, because I couldn't even draw a stick figure when I was a kid. But I met someone who told me, you know what? You can do anything if you really want to. And if the teenage me were here, she'd tell you,
I wouldn't be into drawing and art if it wasn't for big brothers, big sisters. Most kids from my neighborhood don't get into art. They get into trouble. But I was lucky because my big sister showed me early on that I didn't have to be like most people. And to the young me,
that meant a lot. My big sister's name is Sheila, and Sheila is the reason that this 8-year-old grows up to have an amazing job as a graphic designer.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. And that can last a lifetime. Start something today at BigBrothersBigSisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
I see a great need in my community.
So Richard Washington set out to meet that need by working with youth in the juvenile justice system, joining thousands of other volunteers. If you're 55 and older, you can use the skills that help you through a lifetime of learning, giving, teaching, and working. Go to getinvolved.gov or call 1-800-424-8867 to find out how you can volunteer, impact your community, and make our country stronger.
Retired people have a lot to offer because we have life experience.
What are you going to do with your lifetime of experience? Go to getinvolved.gov today or call 1-800-424-8867. We have so much to offer and our nation needs us. Make a difference for generations. This message is brought to you by the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Major League Baseball players are getting in on the action.
Hi, I'm Michael Young.
I'm Chris Young.
I'm Carlos Pena.
And we're getting in on the action. Thousands of high school students across the country are getting in on the action by volunteering in their communities.
Action teams of high school students are joining Volunteers of America and Major League Baseball players to help train and inspire the next generation of volunteers.
It's easy to start an action team at your school, so you too can get in on the action. Are you in?
Log on to actionteam.org. Are you in?
Fly me to the moon. Let me play among the stars.
Red Eye Radio.
Let me see what spring.
This heavyweight bout is about to begin. The challenger wears white trunks with a blue stripe, and the champ is wearing, looks like an examination gown from the doctor's office. And
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
Welcome to spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
AM 1420, WBSM presents Spooky South Coast with your hosts Tim Weisberg and Matt Costa.
Good evening. Welcome back. Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the science advisor himself, Matt Moniz, who's filling in for the Silent Assassin. I'm so used to saying the Silent Assassin Matt Costa after my own name because he's always here. But he's taking a rare night off, a well-deserved night off, and Moniz is stepping behind the board to take care of things, and hey, we're figuring out so far.
We're still here. We're on the air.
Nobody's come and thrown us off yet, but I think that's just because Pete's on vacation. I think if he was home, we would have already gotten the hook by now. But welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight is Chris Balzano. We've been talking about the murder myth. We're talking about serial killers, and we're going to get into that for just a little bit more, and then we'll talk Harry Potter. If you're watching on Spooky TV, you'll see our guests are here in the studio with us. We have my brother Mike and my sister-in-law Meredith. They are the Harry Potter ringers that I brought in to talk about Harry Potter later on in the show, because I don't know anything about it, so they're going to handle all that for me. But let's get right back into the discussion about the murder myth with Chris Balzano, and so we will bring him back on right now.
He should already be on. There he is.
Beautiful. Usually here.
I forgot to hit that button. All right, so Chris, we were talking about some of these murder myths, and I was throwing a few out there that, I thought might be myths. But what are some of the other ones that you've discovered in your research?
Well, before I get into that, I just want to say really quickly that I misquoted earlier when I said 0.002%.
Okay.
Serial murderers or serial killings account for roughly 1 to 2% of murders in the United States. And so that number hasn't dramatically changed. We were just talking over the break in the chat room about whether or not, for example, the influence of the Internet or whether, community apathy, has some kind of impact on those numbers. And it hasn't risen dramatically since the inception of the Internet or, as society kind of falls apart and we're less aware of the environment around us. What that number represents, that 0.002%, that is the percentage of overall Americans who have the risk of being killed by a serial killer. So imagine that the murder rate is approximately it's basically 1 in every 20,000 people in the United States will be killed. Which, once again, while, it sounds like when you say the number of people who are killed, if you say it that way, like 1 in 20,000 people. So how many of us right now could fill a room with 20,000 people or could fill a stadium with 20,000 people that we know?
Yeah, it's like one person at every Celtics game.
Right. There you go. And those are the odds of someone being murdered. And if you then take 1% of that, that would be basically 1 in every 2 million people in the United States, will fall victim of a serial killer. Which, if you take it, if you take into account, how many people are in the United States, all these things, those numbers go down dramatically if you think of. So you take that murder rate, say 1 in every 200,000, and that's murders, so straight murders. Take out things like vehicular manslaughter. Take out things like gang-related crime, which really have take out of the fact, take out of that. For example, people who are killed by family members. If you take, because most of the time, almost always, serial killers, while at some point they might turn on their family, usually at the beginning, don't hunt within their own house, if you will. Then the risk that you have of ever being approached by someone randomly who wants to kill you is it's improbable. It's impossible to actually figure the numbers out. But it would be probably, because I looked just at gang-related crime, and I looked at family annihilators, and even just people who kill family members. The number is almost 500,000. 1 out of every 500,000 people. So if you kind of carry that out, once again, these are like ridiculous numbers. You most likely will never know anyone who knows someone who was killed by a serial killer.
Well,
and
I was going to say, of course, those odds sharply increase if the guy next door to you decides to become a serial killer.
But will it? I mean, obviously, if the guy next door becomes a serial killer and he racks up, now keep in mind, 200 people, and he racks up 10, well, really, the numbers aren't, obviously, they're like, yes, and that's what people live by, and that's how the myth grows, and that's how these stories and these urban legends can develop, because, you throw out that line, which is actually not, oddly enough, that common, but it sounds common. He seemed perfectly normal. It could be the guy next door who's trying to kill you. When the majority of the time, the serial killers who are out there, especially the disorganized serial killers, are on people's radars. They're people who, from their own, because of their own disorders or because of their own personality flaws or own mental disabilities, can't relate to people and don't relate to people and seem creepy. And so the fact that you need to be aware that everyone you ever meet has the potential to kill you and eat you, while sounding logical when you don't phrase it that way, is actually not logical.
It's as surprising, I guess, to some people, those numbers, as when they find out that their chances of winning the lottery upon buying a lottery ticket don't really increase that much over if they hadn't bought a lottery ticket.
Or if they buy 2 or 3, well, I bought 5.
Obviously, that's so much more better. Yes, more better.
And of course, the argument that mothers will give is, well, someone has to win the lottery. Well, someone has to be victim to the serial killer, or else there wouldn't be serial killers in this world. And that's kind of the driving force behind why these stories stay with us, and why kind of these urban legends and these stories are allowed to be given kind of fuel.
Well, what are some of these other myths that you've discovered?
Well, the myths aren't really solidified as much as it is kind of like
just an abstract, like,
right,
there's
like
no hard and fast rules, like, you haven't been able to discredit these theories that we hear put out there all the time necessarily.
Well, if you look at it this way, okay, so one of the great urban legends, and there's different variations of it, is of people being killed by serial killers in their dorm rooms. And this legend existed. It kind of came to full kind of realization, kind of get into the subconscious, and began getting circulated a lot in the late 40s and early 50s, when females started going off to school. Because what it really is it's kind of like you're letting your daughter out. Before then, you let your daughter out of your house when she was going to be married, and she was, and she, in theory, she picked a man who was going to protect her, and she was going to stay, within his kind of his sphere of influence. And instead, now people were being sent off to college where they could do anything they wanted. And granted, there were housewives, house mothers in these colleges and things like that. But really, you were throwing them figuratively to the wolves. And so these urban legends began to develop around, the classic one, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn out the light?" And if you want me to explain any of these legends, as if they're not, you think some of them aren't as known to people, I'll explain them a little bit. Or the scratching door, where, and there's two different variations of it, but basically the friend of kind of the main character of the story goes out with her boyfriend. The dorm is empty except for this one girl. She hears a scratching on the door. She hides herself, and it's her roommate who's been killed by a serial killer and trying to get in, and get help. And because she doesn't do anything, the girl dies. Legends like this have allowed us to think that, and this ties very much into the paranormal side of things, because these stories get kind of put on to disturbances in schools, and they kind of become associated with ghosts that might be in a college dorm, because, well, don't you know what happened there? Someone came and they killed him, and then they were on the wall. Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light? There are very few, if any, murders committed by serial killers on college campuses. So that would be a myth, for example. Now, as I've already said, 40s, 50s, this goes well before Bundy, who kind of had his final act in, the FSU dorms. So there are exceptions to all these rules, but for the most part, serial killers are not stalking your college dorm.
No, that's just creepy paranormal radio hosts like Matt Moniz. Although he calls it an associate professorship. Tutoring. If you have any questions for Chris Balzano regarding serial killers or murder myths, you can give us a call, 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. You can also email us, spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, or post a question in the chat room. And Mike and Meredith, feel free if you have any questions to jump in as well. But it seems to me, Chris, that the more we glamorize the idea of the serial killer in media, the more that it seems to encourage these types. Is that a myth, or is there truth to that?
I think it creates, once again, in the organized serial killer, I think it creates a stylization. I think it gives them something to look towards. But there has never been, for example, a psychiatrist who was as well integrated into society as Hannibal Lecter. Never happened. Now, of course, we can go back to maybe some royalty, especially, obviously over in Europe and parts of Eurasia, that kind of were royalty who were accused of being serial killers in their days, or not in their day, but looking back, you go like, oh, well, that's a serial killer. But one of the things, so a serial killer looking to Hannibal Lecter, for example, as an inspiration, will never be as smart as Hannibal Lecter, because Hannibal Lecter is the product of a really creative mind who can let all the tumblers fall in place and create this mix of different types of mindsets that serial killers might have to create, like I used the term before, the uber serial killer. I think that there might be copycats, but once again, if you're copycatting, the thing that might be molded in that is the way that you execute, but not necessarily the rise and fall of your own kind of need to kill. And so therefore, it doesn't necessarily make new serial killers or make someone a serial killer, but rather ends up kind of molding how they go out and do their business.
Well, before we transition from serial killers to Harry Potter, a natural, seamless transition, I'm sure. Before we do that, let me ask you, in your research and your study, who is the most fascinating serial killer that you've discovered? I mean, not necessarily, hey, who's your favorite? Which serial killer would you most want to be like, Chris Balzano? But which one do you find, whether it be his methodology, whether it be his mental makeup, who is it that draws your interest the most?
Okay, so I've got three different answers to that. The one I'm scared of the most is the Night Stalker, because the Night Stalker had no victimology.
Oh yeah, you don't have to worry about that. He died.
Yeah. The Night Stalker's still alive, brother.
No, Kolchak? No, he's dead.
Good series. Good series.
Oh, you mean the serial killer that I stalk? Okay.
Yeah. Although, according to Jackie Barrett, there are cults that are still very much active that he has a hand in, which, of course, just made me not sleep for nights because I already have a very strange, irrational fear that he's coming to get me.
Well, you've had some pretty not to blow up your spot here on international radio, but you've had some dealings with people in the past who have sent you creepy things and. And that element is aware of your presence, just as you are of theirs.
There's one serial killer. I was going to say, there's one serial killer that you haven't mentioned, but was the most prolific in the United States. Howard Holmes Hatch, or otherwise known as Henry Mudgett.
That's not the guy from Chicago, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's and we were talking once again in the chat room about motive. Because someone asked, I think it was someone asked whether, and I didn't quite understand the question, but it was, if a person is a gang member and they killed a whole bunch of people in their house, would they be a serial killer? And the first thing was, well, did they kill them all at the same time? Because then definitely not. They wouldn't be a serial killer because there has to be a cooling off period. But the other thing that's really sticky seems to be motive. Because, for example, if someone's motive is money, and the constantly getting of money, is that person a serial killer? And so there's this really kind of gray, which is where sometimes the FBI and other organizations differ, and even people, even like structurally within the FBI, for example, profilers would say anyone who's motivated by money is not a serial killer.
Yeah, like a mafia hitman wouldn't be a serial killer.
Pirates.
Well, but consider, I can't remember his real name, but the person whose nickname is the Iceman, who wrote a book, and they did a documentary on him.
Dugan?
He would be a serial killer because the murder, the money was insignificant to him. So even though he was a hitman who was getting a lot of money for doing what he was doing the murders because he was doing the murders. But for example, like I always forget his name, but the man that you're talking about out in Chicago seems to be at some point motivated by the money, especially given that he was raised poor. He saw some absolutely horrible things having to do with, especially rural life. And then as he grew up, he was kind of using this seductive nature of himself to put people in positions to get what he wanted. He was money and power.
Yes, he was a doctor in. He got his doctorate in University of Vermont, and he was a physician. And he killed close to what it's estimated about 100 different people, and he took their money from them. This is during the same time as the Jack the Ripper cases, and the Chicago World's Fair was happening at that same time.
So if you wanted my non-professional, non-doctorate in criminology, I would say the moment he buys that house across the street, and he starts redesigning, he had a small pharmacy and he bought the big abandoned building across the street and basically turned it into this whole huge torture house.
Yeah, the castle.
The moment he did that, now he's moving away from just killing to the money now becomes secondary to the power that he's getting from the actual murders themselves. And he had enough money to sustain himself.
I was going to say, who is your other serial killer, your other favorite?
I would have to say that I love the fact that even though the body count is small, that people are still obsessed with Jack the Ripper. And so I love hearing the modern day kind of forensic and psychological evaluations of the Ripper, because we have so little to go on and so little to know what is real of the evidence and what is not real of the evidence, and we have very hard time understanding the context of those murders. In the context of the people who might have committed, the person who might have, or people who might have committed those murders, that it's sometimes laughable and yet always draws me in. But for me, the number one is always Son of Sam, because I am, as you probably know, fascinated by the mythology of things. And the mythology, even if you take the conspiracy aside from it, and just the mythology of the murders themselves, and the mythology of what supposedly he had created inside of his mind or was being fed externally. there's so much rich information in there that just begs like an evaluation of the human mind, an evaluation of culture, and it's kind of like this never-ending, I can make connections between all these different things. When you then throw in this supposed connection to a larger criminal organization, and how he might have been just a kind of a footman for this larger kind of organized serial killer or organized chaos company, if you will, that makes it even that much richer for me.
Sounds like
Son of Sam is, and my dad worked on the Son of Sam too, so I also have that kind of connection to it.
I was going to say, it sounds like something that our content director could put together an entire show to discuss.
If the host and producers would like the content director to do so, he could.
Absolutely. Well, I think my dog's telling me that we have to take a break. So that joke just died. That joke died a horrible death, like as if Berkowitz did it himself. I said my dog. Anyway, all right. Well, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we'll talk. I'm sorry. We'll talk about Harry Potter with our guest Chris Balzano and also our special guest here in the studio. And also, you can jump in and call in during the course of the discussion at 1-877-996-1420, 508-996-0500, or email us spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com. We'll be right back. We'll cheer you up, and we'll have a little bit more fun discussion before we put you to bed. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more here on Spooky South Coast.
Hi, Tom Bodette. Well, the 4th of July is behind us. The fireworks have all been worked, and the multi-prong weenie roaster is back in the bubble wrap, which means summer is half over. Better take a vacation while you still can and stay at Motel 6. Most locations have pools, and all of them have the lowest price of any national chain. So get out there, and remember, summer's not half empty, it's half full. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6 and Motel6.com, and we'll leave the light on for you.
What I hate is when this thing jumps like that. It's just because you're retraining to that spot. You can just click anyone. Click anything green and hit play next.
I'm in the car next to you on the highway, heading to work. I sit in front of you on the bus. I work in the office down the hall and stand next to you in the elevator. We've known each other for years, and I've told you a lot about my life. But of all the things you know about me, here's one you don't. I'm 1 out of every 6 Americans, and I'm struggling with hunger. This isn't an incurable disease. It's not an uncontrollable epidemic. There's enough food in this country to feed every hungry person. This problem is closer than you think. Fortunately, so is the solution. Please, visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 7 meals for those around you, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we're Feeding America.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Normally when we connect with him, we use Skype, so it sounds like he's here with us. But there was just so much going on, I said we don't have to worry about Skype, too.
They get to save lives, and who doesn't want to do that?
If your child is sick over and over again, it could be PI, a defect in the immune system that affects millions. Early detection can give children a chance to dream. Jeffrey Modell Foundation, 25 years of helping children reach for their dreams. Visit us at info4pi.org or call 1-866-INFO4PI.
My name is Charles. I'm 38 years old.
My name is Charles. I'm 38 years old.
One day I had a sudden headache.
I had a headache.
Suddenly my arm went numb and I felt confused.
My arm went tingly.
I knew I was having a stroke.
I didn't know what was going on.
I told my wife and she dialed 911.
I didn't want to miss work, so I went.
The ambulance arrived just in time.
I had a stroke on the bus.
Because of quick response, today I'm on my way to a full recovery.
Today I have partial paralysis.
Seconds made all the difference.
Seconds made all the difference.
If you or someone you know has any of these symptoms, don't wait. Call 911 immediately. You could make a difference in someone's life, someone you love, maybe even your own.
Time lost is brain lost.
For more information, visit powertoendstroke.org. Brought to you by the American Heart Association, American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
College softball players Mallory Holtzman and Liz Wallace know winning isn't everything.
It's how you hold your head at the end of the game and how you walk off the field.
These two athletes carried their opponent around the bases after she injured herself hitting the winning home run.
What are they doing? Are you crazy? Whether you win or lose on the field, if you did the right thing, then you did win.
Can they do that? And they showed us the right thing is sportsmanship.
Way to go, girls!
Pass it on from the Foundation for a Better Life at Values.com.
Welcome back to Science Today. And we already have our next caller. Welcome. Who's this?
Hi, I'm Philip.
Hello, Philip. You sound really young.
Not really. I'm 9.
Oh, wow. You're still in elementary school, right?
Does that matter?
Oh, no, not at all. What's your question?
The molecular formula for water is H2O. I also know that hydrocarbon is CH3CH2 50CH3. Glucose is C6H12O6. The general formula for an alkene is CnH2n plus 2. But what I can't seem to find is any scientific formula for Bob.
Bob?
My goldfish.
Are you ready for kids who eat healthy? Good nutrition can lead to great things. To find out how a healthy lifestyle can help your child succeed, go to mypyramid.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by the Ad Council and USDA.
When you make dinner, somewhere a mouse waits for leftovers. When you clean up, somewhere a cockroach scurries away. Could somewhere be in your home? Household pests are more than a nuisance. Mice contaminate food and transmit disease. Termites cause $5 billion in property damage each year. And cockroaches can trigger asthma attacks. Visit pestworld.org to learn how to protect your family. A public service message from the National Pest Management Association.
Mom, thanks for taking me to work with you today.
It's my pleasure, honey.
Gee, you work with lots of people who don't look like you at all.
What do you mean?
Well, there are Asian people and African Americans and Latinos and...
Of course there are. Here, we all work together as a team.
But aren't they different than you are?
In a way, but those differences are good because they mean different ways of saying things, different ways of thinking things, and different ways of doing things.
But Mom, if all that different stuff is so good where you work, how come where we live everyone looks just like us?
Diversity shouldn't be left behind.
Don't look now, but spooky South Coast is creeping up behind you right after this.
That's all right. We can't be expected to know what's in the arrays there. That's Matt Costa's job. He'll be welcome back with open arms next week. But for now, you've got me, Tim Weisberg. You've got him, the science advisor, Matt Moniz. And we are forcing our way through this program, and we've only got about 25 minutes left before we can really screw things up. So hopefully, and... Silent Assassin, if you're listening.
Hopefully.
If you're listening, everything already moved to Sunday on the computer, so hopefully we can just go back and start it over. But expect a phone call shortly after midnight. All right. Well, we have Chris Balzano, our show's content director, on the phone with us. And we also have, in the studio, we have my sister-in-law, Meredith, and we have my brother, Mike. And they are big Harry Potter fans. And I got to ask you guys what you thought of the big finale. Mike, what were your thoughts?
It was epic.
I mean, was it everything that you expected that it was going to be going into it?
And more. Yeah, definitely and more.
Well, I mean, what were you hoping for? I mean, because you read the book already, I assume.
Yes.
So did it kind of meet your expectations? You know, a lot of times we say that movies don't live up to the books. Is that the case with this?
I strongly feel that it actually exceeded my expectations. It was a lot better than I was like when you read it, you visual it. But then when you actually see it in a big screen, it's a lot better.
Was there a lot of, I don't know, kind of open ends to the story? Did they wrap everything up nicely?
I believe there could be another one if they wanted to make one.
And that's the rumor, Meredith. I'm sure that you've heard the rumor that they might be adding more books to the series and then therefore more movies a little bit later on. But
yeah.
Now, your concern was you didn't know if you wanted to see it in 3D. You were worried that the 3D might actually distract from enjoying the movie.
I did, but it was actually I don't know if it would be better because I didn't see it in 2D, but it was my first 3D and it was pretty awesome.
And it didn't jump out at you like
it did not. It was just like surrounding you, so it looked like you were in it.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. You kind of came a little bit late to the Harry Potter stuff?
I did, only within the last year. And if within the last year I've read all of them and seen all of them multiple times. It's been kind of like a sick obsession for me recently.
But that must have been good for you then, because you don't have to wait for the next part to come out. You know, you get to kind of watch them one after the other.
It was good because I didn't have to wait, but now it's like over. I didn't have that whole, grew up with it. And now it's like I did it all and it's done. So now it's like I hope there's more.
Yeah, now it's like somebody who watched all 6 Star Wars movies or all 4 Indiana Jones and Chris, I know that you've been a Harry Potter fan for a long time as well.
I was going to say, are all 6 seasons of Lost in one summer? You didn't have to wait.
Hey, that was your fault. I was trying to get you on that bandwagon a lot earlier.
Yeah, well, no, you weren't. You never mentioned the word
What
lost.
What are you talking about?
Have you lost your mind, Balzano? That was it. I enjoy.
Costa and I talked about Lost all the time on the show, and then all of a sudden one day you said you were watching it, and I was like, oh my god, finally somebody else is watching it. All right, anyway,
all right.
Go ahead.
That would imply that I was listening to the show, but
okay.
Yes, I was too busy reading my Harry Potter books. I think like a lot of people, and we discussed this a lot because a lot of people chose Harry Potter books for the big book report project that we had this year. And I think a lot of people kind of came on after the 4th book, which is a little before the first movie. And I think that you can really actually even probably split Harry Potter into the first 4 books and the last 3. And so, I've been involved with it. I've been reading them since kind of like that 4th book. So I think 2000 is when I bought them for my wife for the Christmas of '99, I believe, and I've been reading it since then.
Well, I have to admit, never read any of the books. I think my wife read the first 1 or 2 of them. And I started watching the first movie, fell asleep. It's kind of like the same way I am with Lord of the Rings. Started watching it, fell asleep. I don't blame the movie.
You got to skip the first one.
I'm a narcoleptic.
Yeah,
it happens.
The first 2 are like the hardest
Read
ones
the
to
first
get
book, but the first movie,
But I did find that, the bits and pieces that I caught as my son was watching it, the bits and pieces that I caught like on TV when it's on ABC Family or whatever, it definitely seems to have a little, all the time. It definitely does seem to have a little bit of something for everybody. And is that what's appealing, Chris being a teacher, is that what appeals to the younger generation, the fact that it has something for everybody pretty much?
Yeah, and I think that one of the benefits of the book, which I actually consider a bit of the downfall of it, or one of the bad things about it, is that the language and the plot are really simplistic. And so you can get involved and just read the story. Like, there's not a lot of sophisticated language, and as the books go on, that gets a slightly better, but never kind of overshoots its core audience, which would kind of be whatever year Harry's in, if not a little bit lower. But I think that one of the things is that it is so accessible. And for all that's great about it, and I do think that they're great, mainly because, so many people have read books that are Harry Potter books that wouldn't normally read. And that got them to go on to other books. But there's nothing really new in any of the Harry Potter books. And so part of the genius of J.K. Rowling is her ability to borrow from all these different kind of mythologies and add this kind of twist to it, her twist to it, and try to kind of, add these kind of, even the wording of things and the naming of things is very much like a tip of the hat to other mythologies that have been successful and are useful, and it's kind of juggling those is what's really good. And so it does offer something for everybody.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because we have kind of, in my opinion here, 2 different types of readers with my brother and my sister-in-law and how they approach things. Mike, you have always been somebody that I've known to read, more nonfiction stuff. I remember when we used to trade, wrestler autobiographies back and forth, and you would read books about bands and things like that. And this was really the first fiction that I saw you get into. What was it that drew you in about the Harry Potter series?
Basically, I was watching ABC Family one day, and the movie was on, and I was like, there has to be more than what they, teach you in the movie. Mm-hmm. Left so many unanswered questions for me, so I picked up the first book, read it in a week, picked up the second book, read it in a week. And then,
considering the size of the books, that's pretty impressive to read them that quickly.
And then I sat there like everybody else at midnight outside the bookstore waiting for it to come out. The day it came out, got my copy at 3 a.m.,
and you were done with it by 8 p.m. So, and Meredith, I know with you it's a little bit different because you read all the time.
I haven't actually. Like, I used to read so much when I was younger, and then, I don't know, I just stopped reading, and now that I've gotten to Harry Potter, it's like can't stop. I read them all back to back. Took me a couple months. But there are so many loose ends that they don't go into detail in the movies. The movies are great, but if you haven't read the books and you've only seen the movies, there's so many unanswered questions that you don't know. So that's what keeps you interested, is that everything ties together.
And while you're on the show here, we'll embarrass you a little bit. Going back, I don't know, like over 10 years now, it was actually you found a book on your bookshelf that had some haunted places.
Yeah.
And you and I hopped into my
Went to
79 Plymouth Volare.
We went to Sandwich.
Drove to Sandwich and hung
bed and
outside
breakfast.
the Dillingham house.
Yep, the Dillingham house.
And when we saw the curtain flutter.
Took off running.
That might actually count as
that
my
was
first.
Like 13.
Yeah, ghost experience. So yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like there's been something that drew everybody in. Now with me, Chris, you know, I went through a similar thing with, you know, I've read everything Stephen King has ever written, and I did the same type of thing recently with the Dark Tower books. I'd read them as they come out, but then last summer when they released what was then supposed to be the final chapter, I went bang, bang, bang and read them all right in a row. And I had like the same type of experience where I started to see, you know, the different themes that were running through them and the different influences they've had. Now I can look at something like the work of our friend Bill Gauthier, like with Alice on the Shelf, and see all the little homages and nods to the Dark Tower books that appear in there. And it seems like we're seeing that with Harry Potter across all of mainstream pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there is so much of Potterology that has just become pop culture. You know what I'm saying? So you can say something like, you know, you made a joke about Muggles before. You can say Muggles, and the majority of the people that are in the room, regardless of their age, unless they're really, really old, and who cares about them, knows what you're talking about, you know, and you can actually make a Quidditch joke, and people know what you're talking about. But also, you know, just the whole kind of, you know, the characters and kind of the plots and the some of the moments that are in there, you know, and it's funny because I must have been sitting in front of the only people in America who went to go see this who have not had like any exposure to Harry Potter. And they were so talkative, and I almost, you know, performed one of the deadly curses on them because I was so freaked out by them.
Wait a minute, are you talking about the current movie or when you went to see like the first movie?
No, I went to see the current movie.
So somebody decided to go see a sequel to the final chapter of the films, having never seen anything with Harry Potter before?
The questions that they were asking each other and asking out loud to the audience, hoping that the audience would answer the questions for them, implied that they had not seen any of the movies or read any of the books.
Wow. I wish I just had like money to burn like that to just go in. That's what we call in the world of literature, what, in media res? Where you're just coming into the middle of the story and you have no idea what's going on?
Right, at the end of the story, right? So it's like, and it's kind of like, you realize, like, you could have gone to see Mr. Popper's Penguins, and you probably would have, you know, enjoyed it a lot more. Or, like, isn't the Green Lantern or something? Like, why would you come see a movie that has, you know, probably 10,000 pages and you know, probably pretty close to 13, 14, 15 hours worth of movie? Why would you go? Why would you, you know, not invest that? Like, go to another theater. And
my theory?
Not.
My
even
theory?
if not, like, shut up.
I'm going to throw this out there. Moniz, you can probably back me up. What it was is they were high, and they figured that'd be the coolest 3D experience.
I was just going to say bong hits, probably.
Yep, they're like, oh, yeah, Harry Potter, man, that's going to be awesome in 3D.
Except it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't even IMAX.
But we're talking about Florida, right?
Yeah.
Well, there you go, yeah.
You didn't happen to go to Lakeland to see the movie, did you? It's a long-standing joke between me
That's a Lakeland Superplex, yeah.
Which would only have one screen.
Right.
And it would be projected on the back of somebody's trailer. So.
Right.
All right. But, I mean, is there a lot of recurring kind of themes that you see in the Harry Potter stories that are, you know, indicative of other, I don't know, kind of coming-of-age stories? I mean, besides the different conceits that Rowling used in the stories, but, I mean, isn't it just basically the story of somebody who's trying to not only find their way to fit in, but then they excel?
Is this to me or
to you? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about one of the interesting things about the Harry Potter films is that they, are classic, Joseph Campbell analysis, journey of a hero. So each one acts as its own kind of story arc within that mythology. And I can be a real dork and break that stuff down for you, but it's kind of like the classic journey of a hero to gain something, from point A to point B. And one of the beauties of the story is that the stories all together form one larger arc. So you have all of these kind of like mini stories that within them form like the whole journey of the hero of Harry Potter. And everything is, everything is a point to something else. Dumbledore is Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's Merlin. He's even though Lord of the Rings is on my TV right now, I can't remember what his name is. Gandalf. They're all the same character. And they all fulfill the same character, the same job for the hero. So, all of Harry Potter